The 2024 U.S. election is shaping up to be one of the closest races in living memory, with much of the world watching with great anticipation. As voting day approaches, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump remain neck and neck in the polls. And joining us now to talk about this topic further is Joshua Burgin, Program Coordinator, Warsaw Security Forum. Good morning, Josh, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
Great to have you. So now let's start with, so when it comes to our region where Poland is located, what's at stake looking at the bigger picture?
Well, frankly, I think Poland is too important to the United States for really any significant deviation or changes from the standpoint of either a Trump administration or a Harris administration. As you probably know, there's about 800,000 registered voters of Polish origin in Pennsylvania, something like 740,000 in Michigan, and another 400 and some odd thousand in Wisconsin. Three key battleground states and three states in which Poland has a significant presence. It is unlikely in my mind that Poland will ever have much in the way of separation from the U.S., regardless of who comes to power in the next election cycle.
So now, since you've mentioned these swing states with the likes of Pennsylvania, now how decisive will this Polish-American vote be in these elections?
Well, I mean, it can be absolutely decisive if they vote in bloc, but I've not seen anything to date that tells me that the Polish diaspora in the United States or Polish-aligned communities in the United States vote uniformly one way or another. If you carried an 800,000 voter bloc in Pennsylvania into one party or for one candidate versus the other, I think it would be absolutely decisive. Nevertheless, it's a big enough constituency to which both parties are reaching out, both parties are doing direct messaging in a way that may not be seen on the surface, but I'm certain they're reaching out to those communities, agitating for votes, seeking for support from that constituency.
Now, since you've mentioned this reaching out to Polish-American communities, we had Donald Trump at the beginning of October wish all those celebrating on Fifth Avenue a great Pulaski Day parade. Recently, we've had Kamala Harris pen a letter to this constituency. How successful will these types of appeals be when it comes to trying to get that Polish-American vote?
Well, in candor, if I had the ability to look at it, I would want to see right now. I'd want to see what do the vote of broad tallies look like within Polish elections. So, what were the foreign voters from these states, and if they're living in those states and they're Polish and they voted in the Polish election last year, I would love to see that data. Of course, I don't have access to that data, how it's split between PiS and PO, but it would be really fascinating to see at a granular level on a state basis how those particular polls that live in the United States voted, because I think that would be a fairly strong indication as to what the communities around them and the U.S. voters that close to them would have in terms of sort of a general identification between the two parties.
Now, what about if we were to look at both electoral campaigns for each candidate? What would you say is the strongest and the weakest point in their campaigns?
Well, in terms of broad voter appeal, I think there's two things. I think Kamala Harris is strong because she represents the status quo, because she represents stability, and I think that's attractive to a lot of people. Setting aside some of the more hot-button social issues, if we're just talking about sort of how does she appear and how would her leadership look like, there wouldn't be a lot of separation or difference between her and the Biden administration, most likely. On the other hand, the Trump team, I mean, he is bringing together. If you had told me 4 years ago, or even 8 years ago, that Trump would be running again in 2024, and that he would be sharing the limelight with 6 or 7 other characters, including Robert Kennedy, including Tulsi Gabbard, including Elon Musk, including Vivek Ramaswamy, that Trump would be sharing the limelight with these characters, I would never have believed it. So I think there's sort of I think Trump is rising to the moment and doing what he has to do in that certain context. But it's also worth noting that Kamala Harris has significantly outraised Trump. He's consistently been a poor performer when it comes to fundraising. So in many ways, they're somewhat evenly matched. I heard some analysis yesterday, and I still sort of think it's true. In some cases, you kind of wonder what's broken with the U.S. political system that we end up with candidates that up until we've sort of gotten into this period where nobody has a choice. Neither one were particularly well appreciated within the U.S. electorate, but in the current context, it does appear to be neck and neck.
And so, since you said it does appear neck and neck, where do you think the final fate of this election will be decided? Which of the, I know you've mentioned some of the swing states, but which one do you think it will all come down to? And what does it mean that one may get more general votes, but not win because of the electoral votes?
All right, so you have a couple of questions there. Um, if we're going to talk about what is the key state, frankly, I personally think Pennsylvania is the key state. The so-called wall there, the Midwest wall of the three states that I previously mentioned, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, the Rust Wall, so to speak. All three of these are critically important, but I think Pennsylvania can be decisive. If Trump is to win one of those states, it puts the Harris outcome into question. If Trump were to pick up two of those states, it's all but inevitable he becomes president. And if three, then it's not even a question. These are key states to watch. You've asked about broadly the Electoral College, the notion of not winning the popular vote, but winning the Electoral College. The U.S. process has, since its founding, had a form of distribution in which, rather than a directly elected or a popular vote, that it actually allocates individual state-level elections, and that the winner or the loser in those states end up basically delegating their vote. So it's a 50-state contest. This is part of why the U.S. presidential election is so complicated, because in each case you're having to compete in every single state. There are certain states that become more important in terms of them being more contested. But nevertheless, there's a campaign ongoing in every single state. It is not a unitary campaign across the country. Many people have asked, why would you do that? Well, we can see that in the popular vote, California is going to run up a vote. New York's going to run up the vote for the Democrats. Places like Florida, Texas will run up the vote for the Republican. In a time before the modern era, where we didn't have things like databases and checksums, the notions of ballot stuffing at a sort of national level would have much more impact. And this was at least one of the reasons the founders sought to sort of disaggregate the popular vote and make it a state-by-state vote.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've mentioned Donald Trump, so let's talk about him for a second. If he were to win, how likely is the risk that he will withdraw help for Ukraine and maybe possibly even remove the U.S. from NATO?
Well, it's impossible to know precisely what he would do on Ukraine, but nevertheless, the team around him remains hawkish on Russia. And so I have a hard time believing that somehow Trump comes to office and unilaterally, suddenly, the U.S. stops supporting Ukraine. That's pretty hard for me to believe. Also, in the context of NATO, while much hay is made of this, I'm always shocked that there's a lot of sort of outrage around the notion that Trump has questioned U.S. commitment to NATO, when if we look at European partner states, particularly some of the richest ones with the greatest level of agency, there's no outrage that they've continuously for decades failed to meet their internal obligations to NATO in terms of their own defense spending. Not a contribution, not a payment to America, but their own defense spending. I won't name them specifically here at the moment, but they tend to be the wealthy north central states that border Poland and are close by. So they're allies and friends, but it doesn't seem that they're nearly as committed to their own defense as other allies, say Poland, the Baltics, and even the United States. And I believe that Trump's tactics have consistently been to sort of push and adulate those who have been recalcitrant around supporting their own defense to step up to the table and be part of the team. And frankly, I would be deeply surprised if Trump's tactics going forward around NATO are any different than that.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned it, but so where and why do you think this kind of outrage came from?
It's a shocking statement. Well, America can just withdraw from NATO. Oh, well, I think there was another line recently that was used. More or less, if those who are not spending the minimum committed in their own defense, then that I think Trump said something like he wouldn't care if he wouldn't help them if Russia came to attack them. Again, I think these are sort of bombastic. I think they are for shock value. But at the end of the day, I do not believe for a second that Trump will abandon Europe or abandon allies and partners. But I do think he's absolutely demanding that countries like Germany, France, the Netherlands step up and meet their obligations. This is not pinky swear. This is stuff put in writing well over a decade ago. And even in the midst of the Ukraine war, the notion that some are going to come online with the minimum 2% spending in 2028, 2030, you can see the irritation that exists on the part of an impatient political actor. Again, remember, this has been ongoing in conversation since literally Bill Clinton in the late 90s.
Now, what about with just days away from the election? Is it still possible to maybe move the vote one way or another? Women are indicated as a possible game changer, and Kamala Harris has been calling on women to defend their rights. What's your opinion on that?
Oh, there's a number of game changers. You know, every single constituency matters. Women is an important constituency. African Americans are an important constituency. African American men, the Democrats seem to be concerned, are not performing at a level necessary for them to. So literally, these are contests that are won in inches. And again, you have certain states, again, think California, think Florida, that are they're highly divided. We know what the outcomes are going to be there. The contested states are the ones where it's less clear. North Carolina, Virginia, again, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, these key, Nevada perhaps being in that mix. I personally think that every one of the campaigns are absolutely agitating as much as they possibly can. I personally think that if we look at the consolidated data on Real Clear Politics, and I've done so in the past few days, and the consolidated data shows literally a neck-and-neck race, and it also shows the comparison as to where the consolidated data was back in 2020 and also in 2016. Last I looked, the delta, basically the race currently neck and neck, separated by less than half a percentage point. At the same point in 2020, Biden was ahead by 7 points in the aggregate polling, and the same could be said for 2016, where Clinton was ahead by 4.5 to 5 points. The fact that it's neck and neck in the aggregate polling certainly has a suggestion to me as to what the outcome is going to be.
And what do you think that will be?
Again, I think if we're polling neck and neck, that it probably is in Trump's favor.
And now, last, very briefly, what do you think? What are the most important reasons for the Polish Americans to vote for either candidate?
Again, as a constituency, Poland is incredibly important to the United States. But when you have a clear and defined constituency in this way, Poles being able to go out and sort of claim to be part of the decisive decision-making, it only makes Poland even more important. Yes, I understand that's through the proxy of diaspora, but in fact, I think this is one of Poland's great strengths. If you interact in Poland with any great degree, you understand that there's a significant diaspora in the United States. There's a consistent and good-sized diaspora in the UK, and there's a consistent and persisting diaspora within the French community as well. This sort of multilateral, strong human connections spread around the world is a really powerful point for Poland, and the notion that there are so many Polish Americans that are able to have an impact on this vote, and they have, historic and even ongoing ties to Poland, only strengthens the ties between the two countries. I think this is less a partisan question. Of course, we can dissect the data later and say, well, there was this and that, and this audience in Wisconsin helped Trump or Kamala. This audience in Pennsylvania helped Trump or Kamala. I think this is immaterial. I think the much bigger measure is the importance in terms of Polish Americans in totality, and Polish Americans because they're important in totality, make them important in this election. And the strong ties between our two countries cannot be overstated. And frankly, I hope they continue for many, many generations to come, because I think we share incredibly similar values, common faith, common perspective on our adversaries and allies. And I think it's important that the Polish-American relationship continue in perpetuity.
All right, and with that message, which highlights the Polish-American alliance, we'll end it right there. Joshua Burgin, Program Coordinator, Warsaw Security Forum, thank you very much for joining us here this morning on TVP World.
Always a pleasure to see you, Alexandra.
And with that, it's a wrap for this edition of World Talks. But as always, do stay tuned to TVP World for more breaking news, updates, and interviews like this one.